Cool. Thanks for the intro. Mac, you're going to pipe in if anyone has questions throughout the presentation, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you for attending, everyone, and you're more than welcome to ask questions at any time. I think Vincent and I are both pretty casual about stopping mid-presentation, being able to answer questions, and we can try to stop at different sections as well, maybe to ask, so we don't just wait until the very end. Before we get started, just want to run through a quick agenda of what we're going to cover today. We have a couple different things. We're going to start with, I want to discuss the concept of wartime competitive intelligence to set the stage for how we can be thinking about managing our CI programs now and for the rest of the year. And then we're going to cover some of the emerging trends that we're seeing in CI over the last couple of weeks. So we have 4 key trends that we've seen and some emerging tactics that we have also seen our customers use, see other CI experts use, and also that we've been trying ourselves. So our goal with this webinar, along with most of the webinars that we do, is for them to have really actionable takeaways. So we're hoping that you'll be able to come out of this with a bunch of ideas, like an understanding of the trends, but also maybe a bunch of examples and ideas on new things that you could try to really level up your CI program in these times. And the tactics aren't meant to be clue specific. So there might be a couple of examples that we share that are about you know, how we use our own tool, but they can be taken outside of the context of using our software. It can be about using any CI tool, or in most cases, most of the things that you're doing can be done manually as well. So meant to really provide ideas no matter where you're at in your CI program. And then we'll end with some questions and wrap up. And Vincent is our VP of Product Marketing. He also manages our CI program here at Clue. So he's going to share some customer stories and also some best practices and things that we're trying with our own CI program throughout the presentation. So I think feel free to pop in and add color sort of throughout the presentation as well. So wartime competitive intelligence. Excited to talk about this because it feels really relevant. The principle of competitive intelligence is really founded in the idea that if we understand our competitors, if we understand our market, and if we understand our customers, we should be able to make better decisions. And in business, the decisions that we're making are really, they either help us to win the battle against our competitors or to lose. And I don't know your specific business, but I think right now when we look at the market and we look at, you know, what's happening to a lot of companies in it, it feels like there's a bit of a battle happening. And if that battle hasn't started yet, it feels like there's sort of an impending battle looming ahead of us in sort of the months and the year to come. So it felt really relevant to take a look at wartime intelligence strategy and to look at how military strategists have used intelligence to win battles, to see if there's anything that we could learn from them. And I found an interesting story that I shared with Vincent last night that felt relevant to share with everyone today. I went literally through the CIA's website and was reading a history of a bunch of different battles to see if there are any nuggets of gold that we could take away. And I found a really interesting story. So I'm going to share the story of the 6-Day War. And the 6-Day War took place in 1967. And it was between Israel and a few of their neighboring nations, the biggest of which was Egypt. Egypt, if you stacked their armed forces up against Israel's, they outmanned and out-resourced them by a long shot. So they had like 4 times as many warships, 3 times as many aircraft, twice the manpower, and I think like twice the tanks, basically on every front possible. They had them out-resourced, and Israel at the same time, with fewer resources, also had to defend multiple fronts around their country where Egypt was able to focus all of their resources to one front, one border. But what Israel had on their side was a really strong intelligence program. So the leader of their program, really interesting, didn't just want to know everything that there was to know about the opponent. He wanted to know like the most minute detail. He wanted to know literally the meals that people on Egypt's armed forces were fed every day. So they knew everything. They knew exactly where every plane was and who the pilots were. They knew the shift change schedules for the radar controllers. They knew the morning schedules for the pilots. They knew everything about all of the communications channels that the Egyptian armed forces had, and they knew when all of the senior air officials would be out of contact with their forces. So they had a full like lay of the land from a really thorough intelligence program. And what happened was tensions were building, and then at some point, Israel, through intelligence gained from other foreign governments that they had relationships with, they found out that Egypt was planning an attack. So they were planning an attack against Israel, and Israel armed forces were left with two options. They could either preempt that attack with a strike of their own, or they could wait for it to happen and fight a battle completely out-resourced, which probably didn't seem like an option. So they ended up choosing the first one, which was to strike with their own preemptive air attack. And so what they did was they planned it really strategically using all the information that they knew. They struck at a time when the air officials were out of contact with their forces. They struck at a time when there was a shift change between the radar controllers. So there was no one to give definitive orders out to people on the ground. So what happened was they left the pilots were on the ground. They're out of communication with their leaders. Those who were willing to make decisions without directive and to get into the air were easily taken down. And other people on the ground were just left in disorganization and disarray. And within hours, the Israeli Air Force was actually able to take out and destroy 3/4 of the Egyptian air, what would you call it? Their entire Air Force. Yeah, which is, I mean, phenomenal, which is really interesting, but is just an interesting story to share the impact that good intelligence can have in a battle. And it really just shows that, with fewer resources, it's possible to still win a battle when you're using intelligence effectively.
That's a great story. I think one of the things that really drew out to me was, in that sense, intelligence is about helping to optimize the resources that are available, the limited resources that are available, and especially like given the times that we're in right now, everybody's resources are strapped. So how can we help the rest of the company and help ourselves to be much more effective with what we're doing and be able to win in the battles that are out there, right? And battles are going to come in multiple fronts. Like we are in a position where it's slightly different from peacetime type of competitive intelligence. Like peacetime competitive intelligence, it's you get the choice and you get the option to decide on where you want to focus your energies. Whereas when you're shifting to war times, like battles are going to come to you, and so a lot of what we're going to talk about is how what we're seeing in terms of our clients in their shifts to help set themselves up for the battles ahead.
Great. Totally. And I think when we were talking about the stories, about this story, there were also a few key themes that felt really relevant to how we're managing CI programs today. So first is the importance of building relationships. In the example in the story that I shared, Israel was able to build relationships that they use to gather intelligence. That's very similar to how we work within the organization with our CI programs. It's important to build relationships to foster your information sources. The second is about building the system. So making sure that you've set up your CI program to act as that central repository. So there's one place that information is sent, that you've created a system where there's multiple entry points where people can be sharing information through, so that they don't have to change their workflow, but that it works effectively for them within their normal workflows. And then it's about knowing your competitor, knowing your market, basically knowing as much as you possibly can, so that you know what's going to happen in battle before you even engage. And Vincent, that was a point that you shared with me yesterday that I particularly liked.
That's part of
And
war.
yeah, and then finally, really, it's about striking with precision. So, with fewer resources, we can still win, we can still be effective, and intelligence plays a really key role in helping us to be more precise in the way that we're striking, or in the case of business, how we make decisions. Is there anything else you'd add on this slide, Vincent?
No, I think you did a great job in terms of summarizing what we've seen and heard. I think, to reiterate your point that there is something brewing in the marketplace if it hasn't already started in the respective markets that everybody's in. And I think one of the things that we're going to start seeing is that the notion of competition is going to expand. Like, it's not necessarily just going to be the key competitors that you are in deals with every day, but you're also going to be competing for attention. You're going to be competing with everybody else that need to expand their market to look for new avenues of sales. So that's an additional aspect of what we want to start thinking about in terms of wartime CI.
Yeah, and I think sort of our final takeaway, what we are thinking about for CI teams and CI programs right now is this is a really important time to build. So building the relationships, building the systems, this is a really important time to build your program correctly. So you're setting yourself up to win in the future and to be successful. Please click to the next slide, mouse. Okay, cool. So let's get to the first trend. What we're seeing across a large number of our customers are that CI teams are shifting between strategic and tactical intelligence. Teams that were primarily focused serving, for example, sales teams with battle cards, more tactical intelligence, are now shifting to more strategic intelligence efforts. So they're capturing information, capturing changes to the market landscape, as well as information on customers, on prospects. I think there's a sense that knowing about our competitors is not enough. We need to know the full system that's affecting the business. And we think of this as creating a 360-degree view of the market landscape, which is really critical for your program right now in order for you as a CI professional to add value across the entire organization. So thinking back to those wartime principles, it's about building relationships. An important aspect of that is right now, it's really critical for teams to be able to pull in information about what's happening from every front. So whether that's your SDR team and what's happening with your prospects, your customers and what's happening with them, or what's happening to the broad market, we're seeing that people are trying to pull in more information on a variety of topics about the market. And thinking about how we're going to pull in that knowledge is really important. So I wanted to share some actual specific examples of what we're seeing both our customers try and ourselves. On the customer side, we've seen really like a big uptick in the creation of market or additional topic boards. That's really clue specific, but that just means people are spending efforts tracking, collecting, and centralizing information on the market. They're also trying new tactics to capture intel from the field. So, I think that's relevant for us, likely for other people, but the impact of COVID-19 had a lot of competitors responding to it. So we've all probably received emails from CEOs saying, here's the response that our business is taking in response to COVID-19. We've also, the best source of information right now to figure out what your competitors are doing is the field. Our salespeople have the first point of contact to understand what competitors are saying, what discounts they're offering, what services they're offering right now. So a huge focus on how we can collect information from the field more effectively is a trend that we're seeing. A couple specific clue examples on this, and Vincent, maybe you have something else to add, but we've seen people set up their competitor boards and use rumor lanes. So like really enabling sales teams to contribute directly into Clue and create content. So some companies are using like a rumor lane Basically, salespeople can send their information. It goes into a rumor lane, which means it's unverified, but gives the CI people a really clear view onto like, what are we hearing from the field that needs to be verified or validated before we can do anything with, but still allows us to like get a bit of a pulse of what we're hearing. And then also some teams that are really giving agency to their sales teams to update competitor content directly. So I think it probably depends on the context of your business and what would work for you, but seeing some different things there. And then the last is around messaging. So messaging in a couple of fronts. I think it's been really important for companies to listen to how their competitors are messaging about COVID-19, how they're messaging to prospects and to customers at this time, and to use that to inform their own messaging approaches. So a lot of CI teams right now have actually spent time and effort building out messaging documentation and messaging support for their own sales teams. Vincent, you might want to share as well some of the things that we've been trying.
Yeah, so as with a lot of our clients, like we also built a new war room type of competitor board to help us to capture a couple of things. One is, what are our prospects actually saying, responding, and our frontline teams, our prospecting teams, what they're hearing on a day-to-day basis, and we capture that into weekly cards, so we can actually see changes over time. We have our customer success teams also capturing that and responsible for capturing what they're hearing from their client contacts and how their business is actually reacting and what their concerns actually might be. Obviously with our sales team in terms of providing that feedback in prospects as well. But what we're also capturing is what, generally speaking, what the market is actually saying in terms of messaging and the messaging strategy. We can see, and we have actually seen, like, changes over week-on-week basis, whereby initially there was a bunch of messages that were much more about times of crisis, and then shifting to empathy messages. And we're also seeing, slight changes in the marketplace. And that's really a great place for us to start to centralize all that, so that all of our customer-facing teams can actually look at and say, okay, well, if these things are happening right now, and my contact is actually responding in a certain way, I can actually use that information to respond in a slightly different, or reach out in a slightly different way. And we also capture all of that in the form of a Cloverfield newsletter sent out on a weekly basis to the entire company. I call it the Cloverfield newsletter because it's a play on the movie Cloverfield. If you guys have watched that movie, it was about a bunch of aliens in a very uncertain environment, kind of where we are right now. And so I kind of want to play around with that. And really what it is just to use that as a hook to everybody, so that they realize that these things that they're contributing into are being used, are being shared, and that it feeds that snowball effect and get everybody to continue to contribute. Because one of the things that really comes out of this type of moment is that it's a really great time to do a reset of expectations, a reset for your own anxieties, a reset on what others might have initially not wanted to spend too much time contributing, but now everybody is more willing to work together to help contribute to this larger war room type of concept.
Great. Okay, so we'll just give this like quick example. This is a peek into our very own sort of COVID war room board, where we've been centralizing a lot of information over the last few weeks. So stuff that we put in here includes the key messaging that we've built to support our sales, marketing, and customer success teams. We're also tracking type of objections that we're hearing from customers and prospects to help support our customer success and sales teams. We've included resources that can be shared out that we've built specifically to be helpful at this time for both our customers and our prospects. And then another interesting thing that we're doing that I've found really useful is we've created different lanes to track what we're hearing from the field. So we have a prospect lane, and then we also have a customer lane. And what we're doing every week is grabbing stories that we're hearing about prospects or customers and grouping them into like one card per week to help us track over time, like what are we hearing week over week from our prospects or even from our customers, and how is that changing over time? So I think for us, what's been helpful is the concept of being able to track the changes over time, not just like a huge, a bunch of stories shared into one lane, but the concept of time and how those stories might change, I think will be really helpful to make us more strategic in our decisions in the coming months.
And it's also great to be able to look back as well. One of the things that we obviously did as a company is throw everything we're doing into Slack. And we all know that Slack becomes a pretty massive black hole sometimes. So this change was actually a very important change for us. So we can actually just go back and say, oh, 2 weeks ago, we kind of tried this messaging and it's not working because something else happened.
Yeah.
It also helps to identify the content gaps being on the marketing side, so we know how we can better enable the sales teams by seeing it directly from our customers and seeing what they need and how we can provide it.
That's a good point, Mac. Okay, so now we're gonna pop up our very first poll question. We want to know which teams you're serving with intelligence right now. So I believe you can answer all that apply. We'll give you a couple minutes to do that. If anyone has any questions they want to ask while we're doing this, now might be a good time.
Yeah, there's a chat window on the side there. My bet is we'll see sales teams and product teams the most, but I'll be looking for surprises out of this poll.
I'm seeing this poll live. Is anyone else seeing this live?
I am.
I am.
Oh, cool. Oh, you are. You're betting, and you also see it live.
I'd be interested to know
Oh wow, Vincent, you're right. How smart.
I'd be interested to know what the increase in teams, like executive teams, are. Like if they're enabling executive teams now, were you guys enabling them prior to this, or is this a new type of team that you're reaching out to?
Mac, do you want me to end the poll here?
Yeah.
Or you can too. Okay. I don't understand how this like hosting thing works. Help me, technology, help me.
This is our very first remote webinar. I'm just going to go ahead and share the results now.
Cool. This is being shared?
Yeah.
Awesome. So Vincent, well, you were kind of correct.
I was only right about one of it.
You're right about the sales team.
Yeah.
So to me, I mean, I'd be interested to know what you find interesting about this. It actually looks like a lot of people are serving intelligence to a lot of teams across the company, which I didn't actually expect people to be serving quite as many teams as they are.
I think the only outstanding thing here is just talent acquisition. Not that it's a surprise, but it is interesting to see a complete zero. I was expecting at least one or two.
Interesting. Great.
Moving on.
Okay. So the second trend we wanted to talk about is scaling support to all internal and partner teams. So how fitting that people are actually supporting a lot of people across their organizations. You know, the goal of growing a CI program is to be able to drive more value across the entire organization. So I think when people are starting their CI programs, they're not always supporting every team, but that's what you want to mature and grow towards being able to do. Enabling more teams and different stakeholders in a remote only world, I think we've seen is different. And so we wanted to share some of the best practices that we're seeing from our clients in how they're enabling better decision-making across multiple teams. So I think we all know this now, but in-person training, shoulder taps, those sorts of things aren't happening. And we have Zoom, we have Slack, we have whatever communications channels that we have, but it's not entirely the same. And that can cause collaboration gaps. That can also cause a loss of really important tribal knowledge if we're not taking action to work on that. So it goes back to the importance of building that system and creating a systematic way to enable all internal and partner teams and to distribute out that information to people in ways that will be effective. I think we've also seen and felt that teams or functions within the organization that may have had a light interest in competitive or market intelligence now just have an increased appetite across the board. I think that, for everyone, when our worlds sort of get thrown upside down a little bit related to work and we don't know, what weighs up and what weighs down, people are just looking for information to understand what's happening in the market, and to inform better decision-making in their function. We're working with limited understanding of what's happening right now. Vincent, anything you'd add on that?
I think it's very much about tapping into the new way of doing things, right? That people want to be involved and connected. So scaling insights remotely, it's as much about distributing as about engaging in a way that people who are remote are going to feel involved and feel connected.
I think that's a great point. Some of the things that we've seen our customers doing and some of the tactics that they've been taking to scale their insights remotely is, number one, and probably the most common, is just an increased use of Intel Digest or newsletters as a communications tool. So I think that CI teams are building newsletters for different stakeholders within their organization, specific to what information they'd find useful, be that your executive team or your product team, your sales or customer success or marketing. Different stakeholders have different needs for information, and Intel Digest or newsletters, I think, can be an effective way to share out right now. We've also seen a couple of customers building building a cross-functional CI committee. So this is a really interesting idea. Basically the concept is to bring together key leaders from different functions of the organization with the goal of building relationships with them, being able to source more information across different functions of your organization, but also to build advocates for your CI work to help increase engagement and access of your competitive content by different functions of the company. And Vincent, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you recently shared out it was maybe Scott Kim from Gartner, who had shared out or published a blog post on the concept of the CI committee that was really interesting. Mm-hmm. I was thinking we could send as a follow-up to people after this webinar as well. It's a good read.
Yeah, that's a good call. That's a good call. We can find that.
Cool. And then the last thing that we're seeing from customers are just an increase and more regular executive presentations being done. They're happening more frequently, and CI teams are sharing insights on what's happening in the market. So who's still around, who's getting crushed, and sort of how that's affecting and what's changing in pipeline deals. Now, Vincent has led a ton of changes for our own CI program in recent weeks around the way that we're communicating CI and intelligence at Clue. So I'll let you speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the main thing for me here is it is taking advantage of the situation that everybody's changing their behaviors so that we can actually make some of these changes happen. A lot of this are things that we thought of and wanted to do, but it's a case of, it feels like a nice to have before, but now it's a case of, well, let's put these into action because the world is changing. And I'll talk quickly about the executive presentations as well, because I've had a lot of experience on this prior to Clue and also now at Clue. It's that notion of presentations. Executives are used to this presentation being sent over in a PDF or a PowerPoint deck and whatnot. And one of the things that we're doing at Clue is we're actually putting these reports directly onto Clue itself as a quote unquote battle card. And the reason is simple. I don't want anybody to need to ask me where the latest stuff is or try to search on Google Drive, because we all know how much of a pain that is. And that just saves everybody time, right? That everybody knows where to actually go to. And we kind of talked about the COVID Field newsletter before, and this is in addition to the regular competitor newsletter that we actually send out to. Because we're sending like 2 different newsletters on slightly different topics, but from the same systems, you also need to be pretty explicit and over-communicate about the purpose of the different newsletters and how everybody should be using them. And also think about the subject lines of the newsletter to get people's attention, because everybody's gonna get a whole lot of that. And any whiff of automation, people kind of just turn off, even if it's internal folks. So I remember, I think it was last week or the week before, I sent out a competitive newsletter. Everybody's chuckling because I basically said, hey, look, our competitor number one is probably onto us. That's probably not true. Kind of, it's true, but it got everybody's attention, and the open rates on that particular newsletter was through the roof. So
you mean with that
like
subject line? That was a great subject line.
Little things like that will actually improve the communication and really to over communicate. And that leads into the next point, which is we have our weekly show don't tell all hands updates. And I kind of use that as a recap on, this is something we kind of talked about in a digest, talk about some of the gaps that we actually have in terms of the intel that we're looking for, and then remind people to go back into the newsletter to look for it so that they feel like they're contributing. And then on a weekly basis, we're pulling that back into the recap, digest, show, don't tell, gaps, contribution, and then feeding the cycle again. And so that helps us with just the communicating more broadly, more widely over communication part. CI committee is a great one. This is something that we all should think about, and we're just starting that as a company here at Clue right now, although we've been wanting to do this for a while. And it is two-pronged. First and foremost is, as Katie said, it was to be an advocate for the CI work and content, so that the champions within each of the teams will be helping to remind people on their teams where competitive intel actually is and what the latest stuff is. But there's a second part of that, which is the champions within those teams, the SWAT team members, and we use the SWOT instead of SWAT, the champions within those teams are also going to be helping us and helping me understand what the gaps are in terms of information that everybody actually needs to have. So really, in terms of a CI committee, and we'll share this post from Scott Kim as well, there needs to be a central quarterback to the committee.
Sorry.
But you want to include members across every single function, all the customer-facing functions and all the value delivery functions. And really, the point of this committee is to not try to boil the ocean and tackle every single topic, but decide on specific topics and challenges to tackle and lead a conversation, and just work on it and chip away on things on a weekly or monthly basis.
Great. Okay, let's jump to our, actually Max, should we take a pause for just 1 second to answer any questions, or we can move on to the next one?
Yes, Leah actually had a question about using the term serving. She said it's pretty vague because she serves up different ways to different groups in regards to our last poll. So I just wanted to know if she wanted to comment further on that.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that you're right. How we serve different teams can mean a lot of things. I think it was interesting to get a sense of like overall all the functions within the org that you're serving in some sense, but to think about how you could, the depth to which you serve each team or how you could do that differently over time, I think would be really an interesting topic or idea to explore. Okay, I'll move on.
Hold on. She said, can you see the chat?
Yeah.
For example,
see, follow-up was sales interacts directly with our CI, but we do periodic trainings to broader teams.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely a valid point. And also in terms of ad hoc responses and support, is also a way of serving the different audiences. So point taken. And I think like we were pretty deliberate in using the word serve because we wanted to get a more broad sense of who are the stakeholders that you are interfacing or interacting with in CI.
Yeah. Oh my God, guys, take me away from technology. This is too much for me. Okay, let's jump into our third trend, if I can keep this computer working. Data-informed sales enablement, and giving sales the ammo that, not just the ammo that they need, but making sure we're giving them the right ammo. So based on this poll, a lot of people in this webinar are serving sales with their competitive intelligence programs. That's not going to change. However, what we are seeing is that teams are trying to be more strategic with how they're enabling their sales teams, more strategic about how they're using their own team's resources to build competitive content and where they're focusing their efforts. Yeah, so I think we've all experienced a bit of this in the last few weeks, but for a lot of companies, sort of depending what market you're in, pipelines have been wiped, or your pipelines are under a lot of pressure. What that's going to mean to our sales leaders is that they need to outperform competitors in order to hit their quota. So any sort of deal that will close, sales teams are going to want to make sure that their competitive win rates are higher than before, that they can outperform the competitor in every deal possible. So what we're seeing is that sales teams are very hungry for content. They're hungry for updated content, but that the way to go about this intelligently is to use data to inform where you're spending your time. And also very important, not only for your sales leadership team, but also for your executive, is to use data to track which competitors are the biggest threat to your pipeline, and how that might be changing over time as well. So for our customers, it really can start, there's a number of different types of data that you can use to be looking at how you're enabling your sales teams. One point of information is by looking at what they're searching for. So by understanding what your sales teams are searching for, you can tell where you are able to satisfy their content needs and where you should be jumping really quickly to build content. So if you are trending and noticing that your salespeople are searching for specific competitive information where you don't have a lot built, that just can be a really important data point to be watching to help inform where to build content. The second is around sales impact analysis or competitive threat analysis. So this should help you to understand which competitors are the biggest threat, not just by deal volume, but also by revenue, and how that might change over the coming months. So that's a really important one. Benchmark analysis of CI content. So for teams that are building out their battle cards or building out their CI program, very normal to do a benchmark analysis. Typically, this is like a survey to your sales reps to track what they find useful about your program, where they're getting value, what content they want more of, and what competitors they need more support on. It's a good way to get feedback from your sales team on how your content is perceived. Not necessarily, I don't know, Vincent, this might, like your take on this, doesn't necessarily always align to like what's needed, what salespeople are saying that they want more of. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you need to do both, and actually three things as well. Like look at the actual usage data to understand what's actually being used, what's being missed. So the search data is actually great at that. And then the second is what you were just talking about, which is what do people think they need or want to actually have, to be able to see whether there are differences and gaps between that. But that's not the full extent of it. The third thing that I would actually do, and I'll talk about a little bit more about this afterwards, is to think more about what are the things that they actually need to do with competitive analysis and competitive intel, and whether the content that you have will support that or not.
Yeah. When it comes to battle cards and competitive content, just to finish up on what we're seeing CI teams working on right now, where we are seeing more frequent updates on key competitors. I think that makes a lot of sense. People want to make sure that their battle card content on their key competitors is up to date and that they're updating it more regularly right now. What we're also seeing is that teams are spending time right now with maybe extra time that they have to build a lighter version battle card for their tier 2 and tier 3 competitors. So going back to the importance right now of building the system for your CI program to be really effective now and in the future, it's a good time, if you haven't found time in the past, to build out some of the content on those up and coming competitors that you haven't had the chance to before.
Yeah, and that's something we're doing here at Glue as well. Like, ideally, we all would all want to have full, complete battle cards for every competitor that we actually see in the world, but that's not reality. So some of these nice to haves become given the situation we're in right now, let's be okay with a minimal set of information that's needed for a tier 3 or even tier 4 type of competitors. And what we're doing at Glue is to bucket those into a more general other vendors type of battle card, right? So a much lighter version than a full tier 1 or tier 2 type battle cards. But the one thing I would really want to spend time on is talk about a confidence survey. So like Katie was saying earlier about a benchmark analysis of CI content, this is a different type of benchmark. This is about almost jobs to be done for a sales team, for example. How confident are they in responding and dismissing a competitor? And the reason why I actually want to think about that and use that as an indicator is that it becomes a much easier to manage leading indicator. Like most of the other indicators that we talked about before are lagging indicators that require you to look back 3 or 4 months. And right now we don't have the time to wait for 3 months for new additional data to inform where we want to be at. So this confidence survey is about specific situations so that we can actually help identify, if you're in a specific type of role, are you confident in this type of task in dealing with competition? And it's kind of like a jobs to be done type of framework with a slight twist to it, because there's a self-interpretation of the confidence level, and it helps force the respondent to sit back and think about, well, how confident am I really in that particular type of situation?
To maybe give like a specific example here, Vincent, so people can understand like what kind of questions are included in the survey. An example could be something about like, how confident are you in like handling objections about this specific competitor? Could it be something like that?
Yeah. So a really good one would be how confident you in this handling a specific objection. Another one would be, in addition to that, more of an open text of like, how do you actually respond to it in under 25 words or 50 words, like forcing that thinking time, right, to make people sit back and actually think about it. I'll tell you that when we did this with our team, we had, I think, less than 10% attempt a 25-word version of that response. Everybody kind of gave up, which actually says to me, it's like, oh, okay, then we definitely need to work on a more aligned, cohesive response to that particular objection. And then one other thing that you would definitely want to think about, and we're doing here at Glue right now, is just to look at our CRM process and the data that's being captured. How do you go about streamlining so that the folks on the front line are helping you to capture information that you can see in real time versus needing to, again, retroactively export out into a spreadsheet and then run a whole bunch of pivot tables. Like the more real-time that competitive data is, the more important it is for you to think and look at where you need to spend your time and resources.
That's a great point. And I think that also leads well into this next piece. So I wanted to talk about threat analysis and what that looks like. So looking at your win-loss performance against competitors, both by deal volume and by revenue. This is something that we work on with our customers, but it's also something you can do on your own to get a sense of who's the biggest threat in our pipeline right now. The important piece is also to be evaluating this regularly. So Vincent, like you're saying, real-time information to changes is really important to track. Tracking how your competitive threats are changing on a regular cadence is also something that we'd recommend doing on either like a quarterly basis. Depends on how fast your market is changing. That could be monthly that you want to look at it. But that can give you a lot of information to understand which competitors you need to focus on and how maybe actually that focus should be changing in the coming months. And then the second piece of data that you can use is also to look at where your team is spending time building content. So you can track, two different things. One is to look at where your team is spending time building content, what competitors they're spending the most time on, and aligning that and making sure that the time that they're spending actually also lines up to your competitive threats and where that time should be spent. And then the second is looking at where your consumers of your information are spending time. So what competitors are they looking at the most? How much time is being spent looking at battle cards or other competitive information, and making sure that where they're spending time, again, is lining up with where you're allocating resources with your team. And then Vincent, I don't know if you had anything to add on to this, but again, talking about the confidence survey, this is gives you just more proactive abilities to get ahead of your sales team to understand where they will need support, even if they haven't identified it yet for themselves.
Yeah, I think the one thing I add here is to think about more specificity in the question that you ask in this type of confidence survey. So you notice here that I'm asking the question on how confident are you in coaching others to lay a landmine? And the reason I ask that is, if I ask simply a question like how confident are you in laying a landmine, most people will automatically, yeah, I'm actually going to be pretty good at that. But when you have to think about how you coach others to lay a landmine, then there's a lot more thought about, well, how confident am I in my response so that I can get others to do it? And that really changes the dynamic. I actually would suggest you ask this question twice in a slightly different format. So you actually might see a difference in terms of when you say coaching versus just in terms of laying landmines. And I would expect that the second question, you would get a lean more towards the right-hand side, being more confident.
Great. Okay, so we'll get to our second poll now. The question for this is, which teams, so different than which teams you're serving intelligence to right now, which teams are asking for information right now? So we'll just give you a couple of minutes to fill that out. And if anyone has a question right now, we probably have time to answer one before we skip on. We have one final trend and then we'll have time for questions at the end as well.
Poll will only allow one selection. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Oh, Tracy. Hi, Tracy. I was fortunate enough to hear Tracy speak at Skip last year, I believe. Very great presentation. Oh, this is a bummer. So this poll doesn't allow people to multi-select. Are we able to change that?
Let's see.
It's also interesting to see what's the team that's asking for the most.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Maybe Mac, you can figure out if we can get this poll working.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. Okay, guys, we have a technical failure on that. I'll take the blame on it. I don't know. I seem incapable of using Zoom today. Okay, so let's get to our final trend, and that is enabling customer success teams. So anyone who's defending against competitors needs competitive support. And this is a trend that we've definitely seen pop up with a lot of our customers in the past month, 2 months. So retention is one of the biggest and most important growth strategies for a lot of businesses. The key is to make sure that we're preparing our CS teams to act as the first line of defense. They need to be prepared to answer initial questions or to at least deposition competitors at a high level, as they're often the first people that are asked about how they're different. Another thing that's really important here is helping your CS team to actually identify when a competitor might be building a relationship with your customers. And we do this with our sales teams. This is something that we can also do with our customer success teams. And the final point is that, you know, there's a huge opportunity, just like we spend a lot of effort to pull intel from the field. PMM and CI teams need to be getting information from their customer success teams as well. So this is a massive gap, a massive opportunity. Building the relationship with your CS team is really important to get information on our competitors that can help us. So what we're seeing so far, and I would love if anyone wanted to share any examples of what they're thinking about or what they're doing right now. What we've seen so far with our customers is people are beginning to enable their CS teams with what we would call top of the pyramid battle card content. So if you've listened to our previous webinars on building battle cards or read some of our blog content, we have what we call a battle card content framework. And at that top of the pyramid are high-level depositioning points, strategies on how to help your reps identify when a competitor's in a deal. And as you get to the bottom of that pyramid, it's way more about like getting into the nitty-gritty against a competitor. So the feature by feature comparison, the product specific information. What CS teams need initially are two things. One are tips and strategies on how to spot a competitor. So what sort of things to listen for, what key phrases or terminology you could hear that would help to inform that a competitor has been talking to your customer, as an example. And then secondly are quick dismiss strategies. So really what you're trying to do is deposition your competitor at a very high level without getting into product specifics and dismiss them quickly and effectively before it gets any further into an evaluation stage. So at this point, what we've seen teams do is really repurpose existing content for their customer success teams that they've been using for sales, but would be really interested to see how people are going to continue to evolve this. And I know Vincent's been doing some work with our own team on this right now that you could speak to.
Yeah, and before I do that, Tracy is saying that they're also building up renewal specific battle cards. So would love to hear about what are you thinking there in terms of content that's required for that battle card. But for us, what we have been talking about and doing is to, number one, use and repurpose the existing content we have for our net new sales team, the sales team, to enable the CS team. And as part of the survey that was actually doing, that was actually also sent out to the customer success team as well, and to see how comfortable and how confident they in terms of dismissing a competitor or responding to very specific objections that we know our competition is going to throw into our customers' hands.
When you did this confidence survey, did you do a different version for the customer success team or the same?
It was the same one. It was the exact same one. It was the exact same one. And unsurprisingly, there were a lot more differences in the way that people were responding in terms of like, how do you go about responding to this particular objection? Like, it's clear that there's a lot more work that I need to do with the CS team, and that we need to find time for it. But in terms of content, like one of the things that is important for renewal specific type of battle cards is to talk about the cost of switching, and to be able to build in that messaging and work with CS team on that. But in terms of enabling the CS team, then the mechanics of how we enable it's also interesting, because typically in a lot of organizations that I've seen and talked to, competitive enablement and CI enablement for CS teams is kind of a nice to have. Everyone wants to have it, but then it's usually not a high priority. And when it's not done, it's kind of okay. That's no longer the case. That's no longer the case. It's now a must-have. So the question is, that hasn't been done before. How do you introduce that into the CS team? And the way that we're doing it is with a little bit of interactive, non-invasive role-playing in existing sessions, and really focus on just the two simple top of the pyramid stuff, which is how do you go about spotting and how do you respond to very specific either objections or positioning questions that a client would actually have. And the how to position, again, like repurpose what you have right now, but really think about how it actually changes for CS team, because as what CS teams would actually be doing would be listening for signals rather than asking questions to suss it out. But as I said, the main goal here is just to do a bit of role playing to whet the appetite so that you lead them and lead the CS team back to existing content so that you can start building in CS specific or renewal specific type of battle cards.
Great. Okay, so that sort of ends the 4 key trends that we wanted to talk about today. Just to summarize what we went over, we started with talking about shifting between strategic versus tactical intelligence and the importance right now of collecting information on your markets. The second was scaling insights in a remote-only world and some thoughts and tactics on how we can deliver intelligence across the whole org in different ways. The third were some ideas on how we can collect more data to inform how we're enabling our sales team more effectively and strategically. And then the fourth is to start thinking about how we can better enable our customer success teams and really prioritize retention over the coming months. At this point, maybe Mac, I don't know if you're able to fix the poll, but we can also, yeah, you were?
Yeah.
Perfect. Let's redo this poll quickly, and then we'll also have a couple minutes for any final questions that people might have that they'd like to get some answers or thoughts on. So the question being, which teams are asking for intelligence right now? That doesn't mean you're necessarily providing anything to them, but you know, who's asking for it? Who's pinging you on Slack or sending you emails or keeping you up at night, making you feel like you should be doing more?
I would be really surprised if marketing doesn't come out near the top on this one.
Who do you think will be second?
I would expect the executives.
Okay. Does anyone have, while we're doing this, does anyone have any questions or any thoughts that they want to share in terms of what trends they're seeing or what's on their mind?
I think it's interesting that the customer success teams are not a little bit higher. We had a really successful case with one of our clients last week that one of our CS teams mentioned that they rolled it out to their customer success and they were like, wow, this is amazing. We had never thought of this before, and ended up being really successful for them. Okay, we've got two questions here.
Great.
So first is, what department do the CI teams report into within their firms? Product marketing, sales enablement?
That's an interesting one. I think I've seen a couple of different variations of it. One that reports directly into sales leaders, a second that reports into corporate strategy, third reports into CMO directly, and fourth is typically what we see in the smaller businesses where it's reporting into product marketing and sometimes in product.
Cindy says, thank you. Hi, Cindy. And then another question we have is, what are your top 3 to 5 best practices for customer webinars? We have customer insights, but surprisingly, other customers also want to know what their cohorts are thinking about.
Best practices. Figure out Zoom ahead of that.
Oh my gosh, this wasn't that bad. I think that's a really good question. I think probably across every industry, people are looking to understand what their colleagues are thinking about and doing right now. We're all trying to make decisions with limited information. So, you know, what we did for this webinar was really to listen to what customers were talking about, what our customer success team was hearing from our customers, and to summarize that in a way that might be helpful. But I think there's lots of additional things that can be done. You know, I'm a part of another group that's more marketing related, and And they do an office hours chat on like a weekly, bi-weekly basis. That's been really effective. And then are creating smaller cohorts of groups with similar interests to talk about specific priorities. So those might be some interesting ideas as well. Okay, so for this poll.
There's just a follow-up on that is
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of information overload taking place within and outside of our company. Lack of alignment between leaders appears to be a driving issue. For those of us reporting to them, what are some ways you suggest driving real, meaningful impact to cut through noise and gain stewardship to move the business forward? Being right or having data doesn't appear to cut it. Ooh.
Ooh, that's a heavy one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of the mindset that it's not just having data, it's also having customer evidence. And sometimes that's not necessarily data, right? Like, it is a customer perspective that is either reinforcing pieces of data or trends that you're seeing. I think that's important because it doesn't really matter what all the internal data actually says. If it's kind of misaligned to what customers are actually saying and how they're perceiving things, then it's not the complete picture. Katie, do you have some thoughts on that?
No, I mean, yeah, I think customer stories, I think your point makes a lot of sense. Like being right or having data doesn't appear to cut it. That's a challenge. I think you're right. There needs to be some alignment that getting people on the same page in terms of understanding of information. I think as a CI practice or like as CI professionals, part of the job is just getting people on the same page in terms of knowledge and information, right? And how they're going to make decisions about that is something that is like a secondary role in what you're trying to play to provide recommendations. But the first step is let's just get people on an equal playing field as it comes to information. And that's what we've spent a lot of time on just internally at Clue over the past few weeks and past month is how can we effectively get everyone on the same page about what's happening in the market. So if our SDR team is hearing stuff from the field, how can we share that out to every other team so they're informed to some degree on what they need to understand is happening at top of funnel? How can we on the customer side collect information about what we're hearing and share that across every team so that we're all working off the same information? And that's like a really hard job because you're curating and dealing with a huge volume of information and having to decide what data is critical that everyone knows and what data doesn't need to be known by everyone. So maybe there's something also to thinking about what information is actually needed by everyone and what is just going to cause overload and actually cause people to tune out if they're hearing too much stuff that's not valuable.
Yeah, and I think the one last piece I'll add there is that it's not just data that everybody needs to be aligned on, but also aligned on what parameters are being used to make decisions and how decisions are made and getting clarity and alignment on it. I like to say, and I think Katie, have heard me say this before, that my opinion, how I think about things doesn't really matter. It is really how we make decisions together that matters.
Okay, a follow-up question to me from an anonymous attendee who's my new favorite person in this chat. What are effective ways to encourage engagement or even follow up with folks after you've engaged with them? Is email the end all be all to encourage engagement? With the way I'm reading this is like, how do you encourage people to keep engaging with your competitive content? Is that what you guys are taking away from that question as well as the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think that goes back to the example of Vincent sharing out that Intel Digest last week. And instead of, he had an engaging subject line, he brought it to our meeting. And instead of just telling us what was in it, he said, if you want to know what's in it, go back and look at the email. And I think that encouraged a lot of us who are used to getting the Intel Digests and maybe not opening them all the time. It encouraged us to go do it. And then we became more engaged with it.
I think that question is also really good though, because it hits on something, which is not everyone intakes information in the same way. So if we are creating content or need to share out insights as a CI function, just doing by email to me probably doesn't cut it because different people are going to intake information differently. So an example of what we've done at Clue is we actually have our SDR team right now do a video. They record a video of themselves, almost like weatherman news style, morning show style, talking about what they're hearing from the field. We play this video every Friday morning at our Show Don't Tell meetings. And it's a really interactive way for the rest of the company to hear what's happening at the front lines of, of the business. And so we can still share that information in the high level takeaways in the newsletter. We still share that information out in Slack as well. Actually, I typically do like somewhat of a weekly post to reiterate communication, reiterate what's happening in the market through Slack. I think it's important to use different channels to communicate stuff because not everyone's going to read your emails. So if you hit them from multiple different channels, eventually one of those will be effective and sink in. That's my theory. Great.
There's another question.
Oh, how do you?
This is interesting.
How do you get sales and marketing to get along? I think they need to be aligned and be on the same page about what challenge they're trying to, what their objective is. That's my opinion. I mean, marketing and sales work hand in hand to achieve the same goal. So it really depends on if they're both bought into what that goal is. That's my opinion. I don't know if Vincent, you have takes on that?
I think you're right. I think the challenge is actually getting alignment on those same goals. And I think that's some of the challenges that I've seen before is divergence of those goals.
Here's one thing I will say that I think is really relevant right now. So we work at a startup, so it's very easy, I think, for us to find alignment across teams because we're all working towards the same goal, which is to grow the company, right? And the connection between our work as individuals and the impact on the company is very easy to see based on the stage that we're at. I think right now, the impact that and the changes that are happening in the market for any company to some extent is actually an opportunity to bring everyone onto the same page and say, look, things are going to get tough. This is just going back to like playing sports or being on a team. We're in a battle together. We have one objective, and our objective right now is to work together and come out on the other side of this and succeed and win the battle that we're headed into. And we only do that if we do that together. If you're infighting or you're not all aligned on one common mission, that can be really challenging. But I think what sometimes is a benefit in times of struggle is that it can be really easy to get aligned on that one common mission and objective and to sort of ignore the rest of the stuff that's been going on. It's just my take.
I totally agree. I think it's let's use hey, this is a great time for us to reset. Let's do a second take on this and try to work together and get alignment together.
Great. Well, thank you for the questions. I think now we've gone a little bit over our hour, so we should probably wrap up. So thank you everyone for attending. We will send out a recording of this webinar to everyone who registered. We'll send out the additional resources that we spoke about as well in your email follow-up. So I think you can expect that in your inbox in the next couple of days. Is that fair, Mac?
Yeah, probably today.
Awesome. Okay, well, everyone take care and hope you enjoyed, and thanks for